I'm like looking at the lighting, and I know it's bright outside of my house right now, but like it's already 3 o'clock, and I don't know if like when it starts getting dark relatively soon. I mean, I know we're approaching spring. It's so weird to think we're approaching spring already. But even with it approaching spring and all that, it still gets dark relatively pretty early around here. So we'll see if I need to turn on some lights, whatever. But with that being said, I'm just gonna quickly get this stuff sorted out. Okay, enough delay. We're starting late already, so hello and welcome to the stream. Parson reads from the book of Exodus today. And today, we are reading from, let me just check which chapter I'm actually starting from today. I think it's like almost chapter 40. Pretty close. I'm past chapter. Oh, I'm basically near the end of Exodus. Okay. Oh, actually, this will be the last. I didn't realize I was at the end of Exodus. Because we had gone up to. I think we went into chapter 37 last time, if memory serves. Because I was talking about like the priest's garment, the ephod and all that. I did talk about the tabernacle as well. So today might be a short stream because I don't have much of Exodus left to read, but I will do some like talk about overarching points and stuff like that. So that's kind of how today's reading stream will go. I don't think this will be a long one today because I'm basically at the end of Exodus. Yeah. Okay, so I was just kind of doing a quick review because I was like, oh, it's been a while since I had to do other stuff too, and of course with the new work schedule, I'm a little scatterbrained right now, but anyway, that's not particularly relevant right now. So today we'll be reading from chapter 38 to the end of Exodus. So maybe I should rename this. I'll rename the video after I'm done, and I'll just say this is the finale of Exodus. Can't believe we actually made it here. We're here. We'll see what book I end up reading next. I might not do the other law books, honestly. I think I'll just jump to either I might do the Book of Judges, actually, because the Book of Judges is kind of an interesting one to read because of, wow. It's full of hot takes that I like to poke fun at, so that's definitely something we could do. But anyway, as far as thinking about future reading streams, we'll worry about that toward the end of the stream. For now, if you want to follow along, I'll be reading starting from chapter 38. I'll be using the New International Version. But before we actually start, I'll just start us off with a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, and we thank you for this time that we have to read into your word. And I just pray that as we read your word, that you would show us who you are and what you're trying to tell us in, your word here. And I just pray for your guidance in that. I pray it's in the name of your son, Jesus. Amen. All right, so as we head toward the end of Exodus, excuse me, wow, first round of the stream already. As we head toward the end of Exodus, technically it's more build up to the other law books, but I don't know if I could actually go through Leviticus and actually, stay focused through the whole thing. Leviticus is a harder book to do on camera, to talk about on camera. So I don't know if I'm going to do that. I may jump to the book of Judges, which is an interesting one, or the book of Samuel. The book of Samuel has always been one that I've liked to do. So it'll be a toss-up between those, actually, of which book I read next. And that would be obviously starting from next Friday. But before we get to any of that, so basically the end of the book of Exodus, it's just kind of a setup for Leviticus, which I encourage you to read on your own. I mean, you can always go to my Discord and ask me questions, but I don't think I'll actually read that on stream. So I may do a little bit of an overarching, discussion piece about what the end of Exodus, starts to build up, right? And I've kind of I've poked at a few of these things. Oh, excuse me, too young. When I talked about the Ten Commandments, right? And how the law books kind of go into detail about the Ten Commandments, and how one of the issues with the Ten Commandments, not really so much of an issue, but when you start with the Ten Commandments, and then of course when you have to apply the Ten Commandments on a societal level, there's a lot of nuances, right? And that's kind of what the book of Exodus, or sorry, the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, more than Numbers anyway. That's what they really talk about. And I'll talk a little bit more about the Ten Commandments, because I'll obviously talk about that as a major theme of Exodus. But as far as chapter 38, 39, and 40 are concerned, it's more of the setup toward more stuff God will instruct the people and how to live. Of course, the other thing too you have to consider is that with Israel, they're going to be wandering the desert for a while, and there's a couple of reasons that happens, right? It's kind of like a buildup of kind of, how do I put it? I mean, there's no way of putting this nicely, but basically God gets really mad. He gets kind of pissed off at the Israelites, as well as he should, and then he decides, and Moses included, and God decides that, hey, you rebellious generation, you're gonna die out here, right? I mean, it didn't have to be this way, but you've made it this way, so you're gonna die out here, and so in order for that to happen, you are gonna be walking around for 40 years. You will all die off, and then your offspring will take over, and I will lead them into the promised land, because I can't have your rebellious asses getting in there, right? So that's kind of how God goes about it. But of course, when we're reading at the end of Exodus and God setting up these laws, and of course the way that the tabernacle and the temple practice, although it wasn't the temple yet, obviously, but before the temple practice was a thing, God's kind of setting up the groundwork for it, and this is how Israel ought to conduct itself. I better check what this is, actually. Okay, it's nothing important. Hopefully it doesn't keep buzzing on me like that. But anyway, because sometimes you don't check it, it'll do a routinal buzz. It's annoying. So sometimes it just hit the clear thing, the clear notification, just so it does what I do. Anyway, so now with that being said about the whole like setup towards like how Israel ought to live, I know the end of Exodus doesn't end on a climactic note. It's kind of like, oh yeah, here's just some stuff God says, and then like it kind of cuts off, because of course you're supposed to keep reading, which I encourage you to do yourself. But anyway, I'm gonna start reading from chapter 38. So here we go. Chapter 38. So they, Israel, built the altar of burnt offering of acacia wood, 3 cubits high. It was a square, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. They made a horn at each of the 4 corners, so that the horns and the altar were of one piece, and they overlaid the altar with bronze. They made all the utensils of bronze, its pots, shovels, sprinkling bowls, meat forks, and fire pan. They made a grating for the altar, a bronze network to be under its ledge. Halfway up the altar, they cast bronze rings to hold the poles for the 4 corners of the bronze grating. They made the poles of acacia wood and overlaid them with bronze. They inserted the poles into the rings so they would be on the sides of the altar for carrying it. They made it hollow out of boards. I mean, to be fair, you want these things to be light. Verse 8. They made the bronze basin and its bronze stand from the mirrors of the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. Next, they made the courtyard. The south side was 100 cubits long and had curtains of finely twisted linen, with 20 posts and 20 bronze bases, but with silver hooks and bands on the post. The north side was also 100 cubits long and had 20 posts and 20 bronze basins, with silver hooks and bands on the post. And the west end was 50 cubits wide and had curtains, with 10 posts and 10 basins, with silver hooks and bands on the post. The east, toward the sunrise, was also 50 cubits wide. Curtains 15 cubits long and were on one side of the entrance, with 3 posts and 3 bases. And curtains 15 cubits long were on the other side of the entrance to the courtyard, with 3 posts and 3 bases. All the curtains around the courtyard were finely twisted linen. The bases of the posts were bronze. The hooks and bands of the posts were silver, and their tops were overlaid with silver. The curtain for the entrance to the courtyard was made of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn and finely twisted linen, the work of an embroiderer. It was 20 cubits long and, like the curtains of the courtyard, 5 cubits high, with 4 posts and 4 bronze bases. Their hooks and bands were silver, and their tops were overlaid with silver. All the tent pegs of the tabernacle and of the surrounding courtyard were bronze. So these are the amounts of the materials used for the tabernacle of the covenant law, which was recorded at Moses' command by the Levites under the direction of Ithamar, son of Aaron. Now, Bezalel, son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah, made everything the Lord commanded Moses. And with him was Aholiab, I think that's how you say that, Aholiab, son of Ahishamach, of the tribe of Dan, an engraver and designer, an embroiderer in blue, purple, and scarlet yarn. The total amount of gold from the wave offering used for all the work of the sanctuary was 29 talents and 730 shekels, according to the sanctuary shekel. Now the silver obtained from those of the community who were counted in the census was 100 talents and 1,775 shekels, according to the sanctuary shekel. 1 bekah per person, that is half a shekel. according to the sanctuary shekel. According to the sanctuary shekel, from everyone who had crossed over to those counted, 20 years old or more, a total of 603,550 men. The 100 talents of silver were used to cast the bases for the sanctuary, and for the curtain, 100 bases from the 100 talents. 1 talent for each base. They used the 1,775 shekels to make the hooks for the posts, to overlay the tops of the posts, and to make their bands. The bronze from the wave offering was 70 talents and 2,400 shekels. They used it to make the bases for the entrance to the tent of meeting. The bronze altar with its bronze grating and all its utensils, the bases for the surrounding courtyard and those for its entrance, and all the tent pegs for the tabernacle and those for the surrounding courtyard. So, chapter 38. Not a lot to say about it. Basically, this just talks about, just the practical work of, building the tabernacle, the tent itself. They didn't mention the courtyard. Because, I don't know why I'm so tired right now. But of course, chapter 39 and 40 will talk a little bit more about like other stuff that happens in the tabernacle area. Because of course, like, the thing about the tabernacle area was that, like, how do I put it? Since it was meant to be like, the idea behind it was that, well, God kind of lives here. And so the people, the priests primarily, would serve God regularly. And so that's why they have these like regular burnt offerings and sacrifice offerings and whatever, right? And the idea that, God was in the midst of the people, right? That's the whole point of the tabernacle thing. And, like, you can easily kind of poke fun at, like, for God to, like, act like a nomad, right? But I think there's something else kind of interesting here to think about. And I didn't mention this before, which I don't know why I didn't, but I guess it's relevant now. Not like it wasn't relevant earlier, but it's relevant now. And that's the idea that, like, once again, you think of like the first commandment, right? Where I talked about how the reason why God identifies himself as Israel's deliverer. And I talked about how like God wanted to identify himself as like Israel's friend, right? As opposed to merely being your maker, right? And, having the Israelites live in fear because God, I am your maker, right? You do what I tell you. But rather, the deliverer idea is that God is your friend, right? God is someone who cares about you. But, well, more importantly is that God is someone who cares about you, and that's kind of what makes him your friend. And so, you think of, like, the tabernacle, and it's kind of silly to think about how, like, God would have people build him a tent because, right? Even though, like, yeah, the tent did have, like, it was the colorful tent in the camp, if you will, right? Wanted all this fine work with, like, an embroiderer and everything. But still, excuse me. But still, like, God is kind of acting like a nomad, right? He blends in, if you will, to an extent, to the Israelites, right? And he lives in a tent, right? Even though God doesn't need to live in a tent, right? But he chooses to do so in a way because it's his way of saying that, he is Israel's God, right? He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, right? And that he is for Israel, and that he lives as their friend, right? And so it's just an interesting idea that, like, the tabernacle system was built. And of course, the other thing too was that, like, the funny thing, and I kind of referred to it, but when they talk about like building parts of the tabernacle, everything had to be pretty. Everything was like kind of. It had to be pretty light, right? Because obviously they had to move this thing around, and so like, you know, a lot of the structures that were used were normally hollow, and so the idea obviously is that like, well, they had to be able to move these things around, so they had to be pretty light, and of course that's why like all of these things have like, poles. They have all these rings, and they put the poles through them, and you carry, the tabernacle basically gets carried around, right? Because, you know, the Israelites were nomads, right? For this time, and for a while, right? For over 40 years. Oh boy. Hmm. But they lived as nomads, and the fact that God wanted the Israelites to build him a tent so that he could act like a nomad, right, was just part of to make that relationship closer between God and the Israelites. Not much else to say, they just talk about like stuff they use, the bronze and the silver and other pretty regular stuff that you would use to build tents and whatever. Nothing out of the ordinary. Although they clearly had a lot. Well, I mean, like, a shekel wouldn't have been that much of a weight. So, when they talk about, like, oh, it was like almost 2,000 shekels of, like, what was it? Of silver. Like, the amount of silver that they had. Of course, to be fair, they did take a lot of this from Egypt, right? But when they had a lot of this material to use, and so one thing that makes you wonder was that, like, when Israel did plunder the Egyptians, was this? I mean, obviously, this was clearly the plan that, like, oh, they would use it for, building a tabernacle. But I don't know if people had thought about that at the time. I don't know. It's just an interesting thought. Anyway, not much else to say about chapter 38. It's pretty straightforward. It's just building. Okay, so here's more basic things that we kind of already talked about, but the Bible decided, hey, why don't we just repeat this again? And that's chapter 39. So from the blue, scarlet, and purple yarns, they made woven garments for ministering in the sanctuary. They also made sacred garments for Aaron, and the Lord commanded Moses. Now they made the ephod of gold, and of purple, blue, and scarlet yarn. You're going to hear that a lot. And of fine twisted linen, that too. They hammered out thin sheets of gold and cut strands to be worked into the blue, purple, and scarlet yarn in fine linen, the works of skilled hands. They made shoulder pieces for the ephod, which were attached to two of its corners, so it could be fastened. Its skillfully woven waistband was like one piece from the ephod, made with gold, and with blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and with finely twisted linen, as the Lord commanded Moses. Now they fashioned the breastplate, the work of a skilled craftsman, and they made it like the ephod, of gold and of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and finely twisted linen. It was square, a span long and a span wide, and folded double. When they mounted 4 rows of precious stones on it, the first row was carnelian, chrysolite, and beryl. The second row was turquoise, lapis lazuli, and emerald. The third row was jacinth, agate, and amethyst, and the fourth row was topaz, onyx, and jasper. They were mounted in gold filigree settings. There were 12 stones, one for each of the names of the sons of Israel. Each engraven like a seal with the name of one of the 12 tribes. Although the 12 tribes and the 12 sons weren't exactly one to one, as I mentioned. in the past. Verse 15. For the breastpiece, they made braided chains of pure gold, like a rope. And they made 2 gold filigree settings and 2 gold rings, and fastened the rings to 2 of its corners of the breastplate. They fastened the 2 gold chains to the rings as the corners of the breastplate, and the other ends of the chains to the 2 settings, attaching them to the shoulder pieces of the ephod at the front. They made 2 gold rings and attached them to the other corners of the breastplate, on the inside edge next to the ephod. Then they made 2 more gold rings and attached them to the bottom of the shoulder pieces on the front of the ephod, close to the seam, just above the waistband of the ephod. They tied the rings of the breastplate to the rings of the ephod with blue cord, connecting it to the waistband so that the breastplate would not swing out from the ephod, as the Lord commanded Moses. Then they made the robe of the ephod entirely of blue cloth, the work of a weaver, with an opening in the center of the robe like the opening of a collar, and a band around this opening so that it would not tear. They made pomegranates of blue, purple, and scarlet yarn, and finely twisted linen around the hem of the robe. And they made bells of pure gold and attached them around the hem between the pomegranates. The bells and pomegranates, after alternated around the hem of the robe to be worn for ministering, as the Lord commanded Moses. So for Aaron and his sons, they made tunics of fine linen, the work of a weaver, and the turban of fine linen, the linen caps, and the undergarments of finely twisted linen. The sash was made of fine twisted linen and blue, purple, and scarlet yarns, the work of an embroiderer, as the Lord commanded Moses. They made the plate, the sacred emblem, of pure gold, and engraved on it, like an inscription on a seal, "Holy to the Lord." Then they fastened a blue cord to attach it to the turban, just as the Lord commanded Moses. So all the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was completed. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord commanded Moses. Then they brought the tabernacle to Moses, the tent and all of its furnishings, its clasp, frames, crossbars, posts, and bases, the covering of ram skins dyed red, and the covering of another durable leather, and the shielding curtain. The Ark of the Covenant lay with its poles, and the atonement cover, the table with all its articles, and the bread of the presence. The bread of the presence. It's like a special magic bread that like only the priests were allowed to eat. The pure gold lampstand with its rows and lamps and all of its accessories, and the olive oil for the light. The gold altar, the anointing oil, the fragrant incense, and the curtain of the entrance to the tent. The bronze altar with its bronze grating, its poles, and all of its utensils. The basin with its stand, the curtains of the courtyard with its posts and bases, and the curtain for the entrance to the courtyard, the ropes and tent pegs for the courtyard, and all the furnishings for the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. Where was I? Okay, verse 41. And the woven garments worn for ministering in the sanctuary, both the sacred garments for Aaron, the priest, and the garments for his sons when they were serving as priests. The Israelites had done all the work just as the Lord commanded Moses. Moses inspected the work and saw that they had done just as the Lord had commanded. So Moses blessed them. Oh man. This is definitely going to be a short stream. I don't know why I feel so tired already. It's not like I had to work today. But anyway, The upside is I don't have to work Saturday, so because I used to do that, and that was always a pain. But anyway, so chapter 39, they talk about like now you probably hear a lot of repetition as not just me being tired, and you can tell I can be a little tired when you read the same thing over and over, but a lot of the repetition that you find in the end of Exodus is basically like, so we read a few chapters like last week's stream, and I'm not gonna whip up the picture again for like what the tabernacle looked like and what the priestly robe looked like. I mean, just go watch last week's video, part 7 basically, I think. But anyway, in the last part, you know, what the Bible was doing was it was telling you what God told Moses. And then now what chapters 38 and 39 are doing are they tell basically what the narration's telling you is, and this is what the people did, right? Because I guess the Bible doesn't leave chances. Like, it doesn't just say, okay, since God told you what it's supposed to look like, you just assume it happened. No, the Bible doesn't do that. The Bible's like, no, we're going to tell you what happened. And yes, people carried out the order. But instead of just saying that, like, yeah, people carried out the order just as God said so, the Bible just decided, and part of it might be like poetic memory purposes. I mean, really, that's more likely the reason. It's just so, like, when you repeat something and like, in orating tradition, and you tell somebody the story twice, the idea is that hopefully they'll get it, right? So chapter 38 and 39 do basically that, right? They just repeat something God said, and then to put emphasis, what these two chapters do is tell the audience, yeah, this actually happened, right? This is how the people actually carried out the order, and this is what they did, right? Relatively, although for the most part it's exactly the same as like the other passage, right? Chapters 35, 36, and 37. And even earlier, but that's besides the point. But the idea here is that the repetition is to symbolize that, like, yes, you know, the people had done what God had asked them to do, right? Which is an interesting contrast when we read to earlier parts where the people were constantly whining. You know, we had the golden calf story, but here we have some of the people of Israel actually listen to what God had to say, as opposed to, like, you know, doing whatever they wanted, right, with the golden calf thing. Okay, not much else to say. Just chapter 40. Might be a super short stream, actually, because I'm starting to feel really tired for some reason. I don't know why I feel so tired. Well, I do know why. Because I was working on another thing. I'm actually just redoing another part of Exodus for like a lesson thing I have to teach. But um, there have been some arm wrestles with, you know, the preparation, but that's all I need to tell you about it. I don't really go into much other detail. Anyway, chapter 40. Let's just finish this thing because we're at the end of Exodus. Then the Lord said to Moses, set up the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, on the first day of the first month. Place the ark of the covenant law in it, and shield the ark with the curtain. Bring in the table, and set out what belongs on it. Then bring in the lampstand, and set up the lamps. Place the gold altar of incense in front of the ark of the covenant law, and put the curtain at the entrance to the tabernacle. Now place the altar on burnt offering in front of the entrance to the tabernacle, the tent of meeting. Place the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it. Now set up the courtyard around it, and put the set up the courtyard around it, and put the curtain at the entrance to the courtyard. Now take the anointing oil, and anoint the tabernacle and everything in it. Consecrate it and all of its furnishings, and it will be holy. Then anoint the altar of burnt offering, and have all of its utensils anoint it as well, and consecrate the altar. Anoint the basin and its stand and consecrate them. Now bring Aaron and his sons to the entrance of the tent of meeting and wash them with water. Then dress Aaron in the sacred garments and anoint him and consecrate him so that he may serve me as a priest. Now bring his sons and dress them in tunics. Anoint them just as you anointed their father, so they may serve me as priests. Their anointing will be to a priesthood that will continue throughout their generations. Now Moses did everything just as the Lord commanded him. So the tabernacle was set up on the first day of the first month of the second year. When Moses set up the tabernacle, he put the bases in place, erected the flames, inserted the crossbars, and set up the posts. Then he spread the tent all over the tabernacle and put the covering over the tent, just as the Lord commanded him to. So he took the tablets of the covenant law and placed them inside the ark, attached the poles to the ark, and put the atonement cover over it. Then he brought the ark into the tabernacle and hung the shielding curtain and shielded the ark of the covenant law as the Lord had commanded him. Now Moses placed the table in the tent of meeting on the north side of the tabernacle, outside the curtain. Now the Lord set out bread on it, and the Lord commanded Moses to lay it out. He placed the lampstand in the tent, placed the lampstand in the tent of meeting, opposed the table on the south side of the tabernacle, and set up the lamps before the Lord, just as the Lord told him to. Now Moses placed the gold altar in the tent of meeting in front of the curtain, and burned fragrance incense on it, as the Lord commanded him to. Then he put up the curtains at the entrance to the tabernacle. He set the altar to burnt offering near the entrance of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, and offered on it burnt offerings and grain offerings, as the Lord commanded him. Now he placed the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar, and put water in it for washing. Moses and Aaron and his sons used it to wash their hands and their feet. They washed whenever they entered the tent of meeting or approached the altar as the Lord commanded. Then Moses set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar and put up the curtain at the entrance of the courtyard. And so Moses finished the work. Verse 34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting. The glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Now Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all Israel during their travels. And that is the end of Exodus. So yeah, not the most, it's not a big ending, right? It's just, Moses achieved the command that God gave him to build the tabernacle. And this begins, Judaism is born, basically. Right? The way, what would later become Judaism is basically born, right? More of the system of it, rather, right? Not the belief in, the God of Jacob, right? That's not what I meant, obviously. But Judaism and its system was born, basically, when Moses achieved, these commands that God gave him, build the tabernacle, make the priestly garments, and this begins the whole sacrifice system. Well, at least in a formalized way, right? Because of course sacrifices were around, but the way that God had set it up here, it was a very formalized religion way, right? And so that's kind of what Exodus leaves us off with before, going into details about like how to deal with certain laws and whatever, right? Because of course, once again, the Ten Commandments comes up a lot. I mean, obviously, because oh, excuse me, the Ten Commandments lay like the bedrock of God's law, and there's obvious reasons for that, which I've mentioned at least twice now, right? And that was for a third time, to set up this system that would not just like reveal who God is, but more importantly, at least what I think is why God gave it to Israel was a way for them, and by extension, humanity as well, to live in tandem with each other, right? That humans, we ought to live together and be good to each other, right? And the Ten Commandments is the bedrock of how you do that, right? And of course, on a larger scale, it's how you would run, a collective of people, how you would run basically society. And so that's kind of where the Ten Commandments, is pretty paramount. And of course, the later books like Leviticus, they talk about nuances within that, right? Because the Ten Commandments, well, when you only have these 10 laws that are like the blanket statements, right, of how people ought to live. And so that, how do I put this? With that being said, this Israel must now, they're held liable to actually, perform, right? And the sacrifice system would be a way for that there would be atonement when we failed, right? Because when you think of like Genesis stories, and this is where you run into some headbutts with people on how we understand the book of Genesis, and I've talked about this a fair amount in my Genesis series. You should definitely go check it out. But sure, there are some parts that like before Exodus 20, even within the book of Exodus, and you would think that like, well, nobody can live up to the law, which is kind of the point. But at the same time, like God pardons people who cannot live up pretty quickly, right? I use this good example in Exodus 1, right? Two women that lie and God blesses them. But I thought lying was on the Ten Commandments, right? Of things you can't do. But of course, the sacrifice system, and many Christians will kind of talk about this all the time, where like, well, the sacrifice system was like the precursor to like the sacrifice Christ would do, and of course that's true. But at the same time, the idea of the sacrifice system, and one thing that many moderns don't understand is that people would say, well, it's such a primitive system, right, to sacrifice animals and stuff. But there was a logical sense to why it was needed, right? Because once again, and you got to understand, and one of the my hot take of Exodus that I used multiple weeks was that like a lot of people forget that in Exodus, and a lot of people also use this to kind of use as their argument for why they don't believe in God, and that would be like where God is he's a lot meaner in Exodus, right? And that's, if you contrast into other books in the Bible, that is true to an extent, right? He's meaner in that, like, he's pretty vicious, right? God can be he can be violent even, but at the same time, when this makes sense, because when we understand Exodus as like the beginning of God establishing formally, the law, right, and giving the special, what many people would refer to as the special revelation of one, who God is, and two, his law for people, right, as opposed to humans trying to figure out how to live. God gives us directly, how to live, right? And so the contrast here of God being super mean and God giving us the law, is that God, this is not a good way of wording it because I don't think this is necessarily true, but at the same time I don't have a better way of expressing this idea. But God felt the need, more for our sake than his, but God felt the need to say, hey, this is how things are going to be. This is how you are going to live, right? Especially when, one, Israel's going to move to a new land because he freed them from Egypt. And two, you know, how they are to share, how the Jews are supposed to evangelize, if you will, to the other nations, right? And be, the blessing to the other nations as God promised Abraham, right? And that's really a big part of what God meant when he said that, right? Back in Genesis 12, right? Of course, there's the ultimate level of that, which is in the person of Jesus Christ, as Jesus is the manifestation of the fulfillment of the law. But that's its own thing altogether. I don't want to go too deep into that right now. But in regards to Exodus and setting up the law system and the sacrifice system, in contrast to God being pretty mean in earlier parts of Exodus, being the Grim Reaper and all that, is that there has to be there's the reality of what it means to live in a sinful world, right? Because that's the other thing a lot of people tend to not really consider, right? And why, one, people are kind of trying to disregard the Bible because it's our love for sin that is trying to push it away. But obviously, in order for this to be true, then the idea Exodus is trying to set up is also true. And that is, as Paul would talk about in the book of Romans, the law and the sacrifice system is the reminder of the fact that we live in a sinful world, right? And not just that, but we as human beings are very sinful, right? We're so sinful to the point that it's literally part of our nature. Hence, the sinful nature, right? As Paul talks about in the book of Romans. And obviously, I'm pretty sure Paul was thinking about Exodus when he wrote that. He obviously was thinking about that, right? About how there's the general revelation, and then there's the special revelation that God had given to us in the law. And of course, the sacrifice was a way to say that, hey, I know you're not going to be able to do it, but I've given you a way to atone for your weaknesses, right? But the atoning was meant to be a reminder as well, right? You don't just kill the animal and then forget about sin, but rather it was a reminder that because we live in a sinful world and we have our sinful nature, there is a very serious cost to, you know, to the fact that there's sin. There's a serious cost to it, and that would be death, right? And so basically, and this is why some people think that the sacrifice system is kind of stupid, and at the same time, all the more reason, Christ came to be the perfect sacrifice, and why we need Christ to be that perfect sacrifice, right? Because on the one hand, it's like, well, basically, because we live in a sinful world, then it just creates this insane spiral of death, which I think is the point, right? That if left to our own devices, we would just destroy this world. Go figure. But if left to our own devices, we just destroy this world, which clearly, yeah, not good. But the sacrifice system, was a reminder that this is the cost, right, of us doing, humans trying to be their own God, right? Humans living in sin, humans thinking we can just do whatever the hell we want. It just will lead to death of all things, right? And the sacrifice system was that, you will keep killing, right? That's just the way it is. But, of course, the gospel message basically is that Christ had given his life, which has an infinite value. And so, therefore, it doesn't have to be that way, right? We can be freed from the endless spiral of death that we're all plunged in head first toward, right? But Christ can free us from that if we believe. But when you read in the context of Exodus, I think that the established what Exodus is trying to do, or what Exodus basically does, I'm not even going to say it's trying to do this. When you look at the Bible as a whole, you should see that this is what Exodus's purpose is to tell us that, like, yeah, this is the system. This is how it is, right? And God takes it seriously, which is why he seems pretty mean in Exodus compared to other books, right? God seems a lot meaner because when it comes to sin, like, it's serious business, right? Like, God ain't screwing around, and neither should we, right? Um, but that's something that I think one of the biggest problems I have in modern biblical literature and biblical literacy, and I hate to say this, but there's a lot of Christians who don't know this, and it's bad, right? Like, the whole is like, wait, you're a Christian and you don't think about this and you don't know this? Like, basically, I'm in the extreme camp of saying that, like, well, that kind of disregards a lot of the other stuff you believe if you don't know this, right? And don't account it into why you believe what you believe. And it's also partly why, like, I hate to say it, but, like, there's some people that would say they're Christians, but then they don't really take it seriously. They don't take the relationship with God seriously. They don't take, like, the idea of, like, how we battle our sinful natures seriously, because I don't think that they get these parts of, like, the Old Testament all that well. I mean, it's all the more reason why, the medieval Christians kept the Bible as the best they did, right, with what we have, right, and maintain the Old Testament with the New Testament, because you're supposed to see, like, yes, obviously Jesus, died for all sin, but the evolution of why Jesus does it the way he does, right? It can be painted out and throughout the Old Testament. And Exodus is kind of that, like, springboard, right? This is our starting point. This is why it is the way it is. This is why, Christ had to come, etc., etc., right? And Exodus kind of starts on that grim note of saying, like, yeah, this is how it is. This is how it's gonna be, right? And so, um, one of the chapters I was talking about, I have to do I'm gonna do a little talk on. I might as well kind of talk about this. I mentioned this earlier, but I didn't feel at the time to talk too much about it. But considering that I'm gonna end the stream pretty soon, I'm like, I might as well fill the time and talk about it. So I'm gonna do a little talk on what does it mean to do intercession. And for those of you who don't know what that is, basically intercession is basically a prayer group. I'm speaking Christianese now. It's a prayer group that prays for a bunch of different things. So something you might find in an intercession group is like, okay, we're gonna be a group that we're gonna pray for, like, we say needs in the church. So for example, like, oh, we're gonna pray for, like, a buddy of mine told me about their friend, right? That's in the hospital. So we're gonna pray for that person. That's a form of intercession, right? I'm praying for someone that I basically don't know jack shit of whom, right? But basically, I'm gonna pray for this person anyway, right? And I do this with some of the Discord communities that I hang out with. I pray for people in the Discord community. They tell me stuff because I'm the older guy with experience in life, and so people, a lot of the younger guys, they feel they can confide in me about stuff, and I pray for some of the stuff that they ask me to pray for, even though, like, they don't really believe themselves, but that's a form of intercession, right? So I'm taking this position, and Moses is a guy who's known, and you read the book of Hebrews brings it up, where, like, Moses is this guy, he's this intercession champion, whatever, right? This hero of faith, right? And this was definitely true in chapter 33, right, where Moses, he does it a bunch of times in, like, Numbers as well, and that's its own crazy thing altogether, because then Moses runs into trouble with it, but at the same time, it's the right thing to do, right? But going back to Exodus, Moses prays for the people and he stands up for them, right? Even though, like, once again, God did the whole, this is how it is, right? With sin, and if you're going to openly sin against me, death is at your doorstep, guy, right? Like, that's basically what God tells the people, basically, right? Well, he tells Moses that, and then Moses tells the people that, so indirectly, God tells the people that, right? So anyway, um, and Moses would be the one to pray, like, he kind of prays in their stead, saying, like, well, God, you're their deliverer. You said this yourself, whatever, right? And God's like, yeah, that's true as well. But at the same time, there's this problem we have, right? And this problem is so serious that, like, if I go near you, I might kill every last one of them, right? So, God has those moments, and because that's how serious God is with sin, right? And so, a lot of, I don't know. There's no way. Like, I'm trying to collect my thoughts, and I have a way I want to say it, but at the same time, there's no nice way of saying it, and I'm trying to be nice about it, right? But you know, I think we've lost a great sense of what does it mean to really believe in God. And I was thinking of, like, this old lecture by Jordan Peterson, and he talks about how terrifying that statement is, to make the claim that you believe in God, and why Jordan Peterson acts kind of agnostic toward it. But at the same time, what makes him admirable is that he actually really considers what that statement means, right? To say that you believe in God. And he talks about how, like, you know, if you to say you believe in God would not just suggest that you think that a magic being of his power exists. That's not really what that statement means. But rather, you understand all the dynamics of what it means to attempt to live to the standard that is established by said being, right? So, if we were using, the God of the Bible as our example, right? So if God cannot be around sin, then if we believe in God, then we must try to rid ourselves of sin. Of course, the Christian message is that it's not possible to do on your own. That's why we need believe in Jesus. But, you know, you still have to believe that. You still have to believe that there is this battle, that God wants us to be cleansed of sin, and that is something we must strive for, even though, yes, we do have the way out in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Once again, why Exodus made the sacrifice system in the first place was to build that up, right? And to remind people of, without God giving the sacrifice in Christ, then it would just be this insane spiral of death, right? Which is a hard thing to stomach, right? And I, and I, it, but at the same time, it's something we all have to deal with, right? And to believe in God, you have to really consider that, right? And it ain't easy. It ain't easy. Anyone who tells you it's easy is a fool, right? But it's the thing we battle with every day, and then it will continuously, all the more as I would say, it's all the more reason to seek out and pray and accept Christ daily, right? Because without that, you're basically boned beyond boned, right? So, that's something that we all have to really consider, and that's what it really means to believe in God. And the book of Exodus is great to really establish that idea of, this is what it means to believe in God. This is who God is, right? As after all, in the book of Exodus, going back to the burning bush chapter in chapter 3, God reveals himself that way, right? And they talk about, like, why the form of a burning bush of all things, right? Because he is making that sacrifice for us, because he knows, right? I mean, he's all knowing, but he knows that, like, without that sacrifice, the only thing he could do to deal with our sinful nature is just to kill every last one of us, right? But he doesn't. And of course, that's because he's loving. And of course, that goes back to the first commandment again, right? That he is the God who delivered Israel from Egypt, from the land of bondage. And in the same way, Christ delivered us from hell, from the bondage of sin, right? And so that's something that we really, when we read Exodus, that should be something you always consider, right? And of course, once again, one of the things that's kind of unfair too, and I know I sound like extremely cynical, and um, I got called out for this actually, for being like, the way when I read the Bible, I can be very cynical at times as a Christian, even as I can be pretty cynical. But at the same time, I think, you've really gotta think about these things on this deep level, right? Because I think one of the scariest things, really, that a lot of even Christians forget is that if you lose sight of that, then the gospel will start losing its power. I hate to say it like that, right? And that's not real. I mean, sure, you might think that's kind of a heretical statement to say that the gospel could lose its power, but you think of all these stories, and I've heard a lot of them where, like, and I know a lot of people, right, that, people I used to be in the church with, they stopped believing or whatever, right? They stopped being Christians, whatever, because they just don't they don't think it matters, right? But why does faith in God matter, right? And I think it's because of, Exodus tries to build that up for us. Is like, no, this does matter because the way things are, our relationship to a transcendent God, it without Christ, it ain't in a good place, because the reality of it, right? And not even like, just between us and God, but like us between, people and people, right? People and nature, even, right? There's this strain because of our sinful natures, and it makes an ugly reality that, well, people aren't going to put up with other bad people, right? And people, and nobody's good, right? So you just have a bunch of bad people not putting up with bad people, right? Nature probably had it up to here with us and our sinful, selfish nature, right? And, God above all that, right? And if we lose sight of that, then you know, that's the end of all things, right? That would be it. All that awaits you is death. But, I don't say this to scare you, but, at this is all the more reason we need that Savior, right? We need Christ in our lives to free us, to die for us, so that, we don't have to face that spiral of death ourselves. Because I'm pretty sure it doesn't sound like a nice thing to go through, right? But the beauty is that, Christ had gone there for us on the cross, right? And that you don't have to. If when we believe, then God will take our place in that. But the importance of Exodus is to show you that, like, yeah, that spiral of death is right there. It's close, and it wants you in it, but you don't want to go there, right? Ultimately, you don't want to go there, but it's there, and it's ready to eat you whole, right? And I think that's the significance of Exodus. A lot of people forget it. One of the funny things too is that, like, yeah, Exodus is supposed to be like a foundational, right? I mean, it's one of the centerpieces of, like, Judaism, for sure, right? And by extension, in Christianity, Exodus is a centerpiece, and Exodus paints this pretty ugly picture of, like, things aren't good, things are not good, but there's hope yet, right? And of course, that's all the more reason, after you read a depressing, well, not depressing, that's not the best word for it, but, mega dark book like Exodus, right? You read something mega dark like Exodus, and you can only go forward. Of course, other books of the Bible will throw in another old famous statement: it always gets darker before the dawn, right? Or the darkest moment is right before dawn, right? They're two different sayings, and they're both real sayings. I'm not kind of just making this up. They're both real sayings, And they both say the same thing basically, right? Like it gets worse before it gets better, which is I could have opened with that, but it gets worse before it gets better, right? And so, um, of course, a lot of the other Old Testament books kind of show that, right? When people kind of disregard, exactly what I was talking about, right? They disregard the significance of Exodus, and then people kind of just do whatever the hell they want and create victims of other people because if you go around doing whatever you want, you're gonna leave victims in your wake. Cannot be helped, right? But at the same time, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Of course, for all Christians, we know that to be Christ, but that's besides the point. The point is that I'm getting at anyway is that Exodus sets up the groundwork of this is how it is, right? And that's something all of us need to greatly consider. Anyway, all that dark, cynical talk done and aside, it's kind of tired me out more than I already am now. And I still have to do work. I still have to do some other work stuff, so I probably will spend this extra time to do it. But anyway, this is the end of our read through Exodus, and I'm grateful that you guys have stuck it, through with me to the end of Exodus. So thank you. I'll let what the next book is gonna be a surprise. Well, not really a surprise. It's more like a 50-50 coin flip, really. Of either I might do the Book of Judges as a emphasis of it gets darker before it gets brighter, because Book of Judges is hilarious for that theme. It's almost comic. It's just full of comical dipshits, honestly. It's where we probably get the term. That's probably where we got that term, was the Book of Judges, honestly. So the Book of Judges is definitely a possibility, or we might just go to the Book of Samuel, because the Book of Samuel is actually one, it has incredible relevancy, especially now in today's world. And you can kind of guess why I think that. It's not a mystery. It's kind of obvious, actually, but I will obviously talk about it more when I get there. So that's kind of the toss up. I know some people probably think well, why don't you do one of the New Testament narratives, like one of the Gospels? Because New Testament doesn't have that many, but it's just the Gospels, Book of Acts. Not doing Revelation on stream. Oh hell no. That's just hot take after hot take, right? So, and especially there's so many people contesting with that. But really, if you think about it, that's all the more reason I want to do the Book of Samuel over the Book of Revelation. But with that being said, New Testament doesn't have many narratives, and I like doing the more narrative stuff on here because it's fun. Maybe somewhere down the line, I may do a upload, more like video upload, not streams. But I may do a letter of Paul. Just do one of the letters, go chapter by chapter, and just do kind of like a weekly upload. But with that being said, this is going to be the end of Exodus. Thank you again for coming. You can come back next Friday to find out what book I read next on stream. And maybe I'll do a Paul letter, one of the epistles, as we like to call it Christianese, an epistle as a regular upload. But of course that might be a little tricky with the new work schedule, but we'll see. Anyway, as far as streaming schedule is concerned, next week, as I mentioned yesterday, and I will mention it again today, because of my new work schedule, I have to change how I do some of my streams now. And that is Tuesdays and Thursdays will now be nighttime streams. And what that means is I will, instead of 3 o'clock Pacific time, which is when I usually would start a stream, I'm going to start at 8 o'clock Pacific time, which is nighttime, more or less. Well, if you're from a different time zone, it definitely will be nighttime. If you're in North America, you're East Coast or something, it's definitely near midnight at that point. But Tuesday and Thursday, I will shift the stream time to 8 o'clock Pacific. But Tuesday and Wednesday will stay the same. But because I've been having a grand old time with Bravely Default 2, which is what I'm streaming on my channel right now, I will actually stream earlier on Mondays and Wednesdays. I will stream at 2 o'clock Pacific time as opposed to 3 and play like till 6. But for Tuesday and Thursday nights, it will be from 8 o'clock to 11. So those will be the new streaming schedules. I will probably write a notice about this in my Discord, as well as maybe put some, well, info. I don't know how many of you guys use like Facebook or whatever, because I do have a Facebook page that I actually write this stuff down. I'll definitely have it written down on Discord. And so, yeah, I mean, another simpler way is that you could just subscribe to this channel and then hit that bell notification as well, and it will alert you basically immediately. You have to turn on that setting though, because YouTube, I don't know why YouTube does this, is you just do it automatically, but it doesn't. You have to manually go into your YouTube setting and say like, this channel, I want immediate notification. Pass the bell in the channel setting, your subscription setting to that channel, turn, yes, I want instant notification. So yes, turn that on if you want to know like every time I do a stream. Also, because today's stream is a lot shorter, we'll see. I kind of want to do it, and also because I'm having a grand old time. I might do a stream tomorrow, Saturday. Yeah, stream 6 days this week, because I want to play more Bravely Default. So there's that. So tomorrow there might be one during the day, but we'll see. All right, no promises about Saturday, but I kind of want to do it. But once again, we have to see if I'm able to do it. But with that said, that's it for housekeeping. So TLDR. A lot more Bravely Default coming, and next Friday I'm going to do a new book. We'll see if it's either Book of Judges or Samuel. Both of them are pretty fun to do, so definitely looking forward to that. Anyway, thank you for coming. This is going to be the end of the stream. I know it's a much shorter one today, but we're done the Book of Exodus, and I don't want to keep rambling. So, hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys next week. God bless you.